been coming up again and again in this. What do names of morphemes mean? Okay, so one thing we could say is we will give the case marker that is assigned to the subject of perfective transitives the name ergative. Okay, in Marathi, even there we have to be careful, because then by that definition we should call first and second person nominatives ergatives, but which we don't, right? So we are going to say that that name marker is the ergative marker. But now once we say that it's the ergative marker, then we go to the subjunctive cases where you have neither transitivity nor perfectivity, but you have the same marker. Okay. So we will continue to call that marker ergative, but one should be careful that the marker, the name of the marker, is not an analysis, right? So just because those two forms, those two environments have the same marker, doesn't mean that we should give them the same analysis. It could very well be that at the end of the day, if you were to open the system, you would see that those two things had slightly different features internally, but that the morphology of the language, oh, I should wear the yes, so the morphology of the language treats those two features the same, but there is no reason to believe that they would be inherently the same. Okay. So let's start. So we start with this example on page 2 from Hindi. So this is an example of the familiar aspectual split. So लड़के ने सुबह चिट्ठियाँ लिखी. So perfective, you get an ergative subject. लड़का सुबह चिट्ठियाँ लिखता है. The boy writes letters in the morning. And here you have nominative because it is a non-perfective tense. So that's Hindi. Now Hindi is a language which does ergativity in the nominal paradigm, ne versus nominative, ergative versus nominative, but it also does it in agreement, right? So object agreement versus subject agreement. There are languages where that is not the case. One such language is Nepali, where in Nepali you see ergativity only in the nominal domain, not in the agreement domain. There are also languages of the other kind, so these are typically Mayan languages, or these are languages which are head marking. Head marking languages don't express any case on the DPs. Everything, their DPs are kind of boring. They're just hanging out with no marking, very much marking, and everything is on the verb. So let's look carefully at the examples in 2. I hugged you. So look at what you're getting. I hugged you. The suffix is marking the object and the prefix is marking the subject. And then when you look at you slept, the single argument gets the suffix. Meaning in perfective, the single subject is being treated like an object. Okay, so that's perfective. Turn the page and we look at the imperfective. So what's interesting in this language is not the behavior of the transitive. So what's happening in this language is very different from what happens in Hindi. The transitive looks exactly the same. I am hugging you is still like the subject is picking up the prefixal position, the object is picking up the suffixal position. But when you're saying you are sleeping, the you is appearing as a prefix. So the treatment, how the intransitive is treated, changes depending upon the aspect, not the transitive, right? So in Hindi, in a way, the intransitive would stay the same, whether you were doing the perfective or non-perfective. The transitive would change. Here the transitive stays the same, the intransitive changes. So I think there is something additional going on here, but nevertheless, what you can see is that the language treats perfectives and imperfectives differently. Okay, that's sort of the important issue here. And then like a related issue is, so this is a case where you had aspect-based perfectivity, and then another kind of, that was an aspect-based split. Another split that we have seen quite a lot here is a person-based split. So as we saw, pretty much every language here except Nepali and Hindi have person-based splits. And even Hindi and Nepali, we thought we could sort of under the hood see a little bit of split, right? But in Nepali, but Marathi and Gujarati and so on, we have aspect-based split. We also have person-based splits. So in particular, first and second person does not display ergativity in the nominal domain, but third person does. However, so now there's an interesting thing. You have a split in the person system, in the nominal domain, but there is no split in the agreement domain. In the agreement domain, Gujarati and Marathi are like Hindi, right? So no split there. One language that we saw, which was not, which we don't have a lot of access to, is the language Gowari, described by Shunidev. And there, it looked like you had a split in the nominal system, and just along with that split, you also had a split in the agreement systems. So in Gowari, the first and second person pronouns which were unmarked, they agreed. But the third person, which was marked, did not agree. So we have that. And then finally, there's also languages like Halkomel and Salish, where the split manifests itself completely in the agreement domain. And it kind of has to do that because they don't have, it's a head marking language, they don't have case. So, so let's look at that. Okay. So again, the transitives are not going to look, well, maybe, let's see. So the important thing is that if you look at he helps me and I help him, what you see is that when he is a subject, in 3a it has a suffix. It's the ex suffix in 3a. When the sentence is I help him and him is an object, then him is just not realized. Okay. So what we learn is object, third person is not realized, subject, third person is realized. Now we have a person split, and when you're looking at when you look at I am lost, I gets realized exactly like it gets realized in 3b. But when you are doing he is lost, then he, given that he is the subject, you would expect to get ex like in 3a, but you don't get that. So what you have here is a person split in the agreement domain. That is, third person subjects, third person intransitive subjects have no realization, but third person transitive subjects have a realization. On the other hand, both first person transitive subjects and first person intransitive subjects have a realization. So this is another split. Okay. Kachi displays a different kind of split. It's a very, so the most striking thing about the Kachi split is that it does not split in the way that these languages have split. Instead, what it does in perfective tenses, at least in some of the perfective tenses, is it just starts agreeing with fewer features. So imagine that normally you agree with person, number and gender. But suddenly when you go to perfective, you say, okay, I'm not going to agree in gender anymore. I'm not going to only agree in person and number. That is a special situation. So it's almost, I mean, metaphorically, it's almost like it's, on the one hand, you have nominative agreement, right, where you are agreeing completely with all features. And then on the other side, you have ergative agreement where you're agreeing with the object.
But it's somewhere in between where it says, I'm not agreeing with all my features, but I'm not quite doing object agreement either. I'm doing something in between. Okay, that's the situation that we find in Kachi. And then in certain cases, we'll see we also find object agreement. Okay, so let's now go to the data. So let's turn to page 7. So the first thing to note is the case agreement paradigm on the top of page 7. So note that this is all there is. In Marathi or for Hindi or for the other languages, we would have one paradigm like this, and then we would have one more paradigm with ne on top of it. Or in Gujarati or in Marathi, we would have like the first two rows being the same, and then the third row we would put a or ne or something, right? But here we don't do any of that. It's just one. So there is, and this is an important point, this is also not like Sindhi, right? So in Sindhi we would have this, and then we would have this, an oblique variant of this. But this is all Kutchi has. Okay, and in this Kutchi seems to have company with Kutchi Gujarati is all that Priti Patel describes is like Kutchi, and some varieties of Marwari are also like Kutchi, right? That is, subject ergativity, nominal ergativity has just disappeared. On the surface, there is no visible ergativity anymore. This is a surprising state of affairs. Okay, so let's start with now looking at what happens in perfective intransitives. Okay, so here are the examples of the simple past, and then we have the past perfect. So the simple past is formed with this y participle. Okay, and the y is probably some kind of glide or something. But so there's something kind of interesting about the y participle for the simple past. So you get things like avio, ave, avia, aviu, avia. Okay. So you have these, and then there's the past perfect, which seems to have something like the y participle together with with a past auxiliary, with the va auxiliary. Okay. So there are these. To see this a little more carefully, let us look at the tables on page 9. So what you see here in table 2 is that in table 2 what we see is the y participle in the simple past has a fairly complex paradigm, and it is a paradigm in which you have agreement in person, number and gender, everything together. Okay. But I've told you that anytime you see agreement in person, number and gender together, it's worth sort of looking at it a little bit more carefully and asking whether maybe it's built up from other stuff. Okay. It may be that you have probes which are PNG. I'm not ruling that out at all. There's nothing that rules that out. But in principle, it's worth looking for that. So actually, what you realize, however, when you look at the present perfect or the past perfect or the future perfect, all of these are formed by the y participle together with the present, past or future auxiliary. Okay. So now if you look at the features there, so first thing, compare table 2 with table 3c. Look at the table for the past auxiliary and the table for the y participle. Okay. They look basically the same. Okay. Except in one case you're dealing with a suffix, in the other case you're dealing with va. Okay. But they're the same. The endings are exactly the same. Okay. The future is a little bit slightly different, but it's very close. So there is this funny form for the first for the feminine plural ubbo, which doesn't which also appears for the one masculine plural, but other than that, it's pretty systematic. Okay. So the first reduction that we are going to make is that actually what happens in first let's study the present perfect, the perfects, right? Where you have a participle and an auxiliary. When you have a participle and an auxiliary, you see something interesting. You realize that the Y participle is actually only does not have person agreement. The Y participle is only has a number and gender probe. Okay, so the ending is ignore the ya honorific. It's yo, ya, I, you. Okay, so it's probably not this. This is probably going to be familiar to Marathi speakers and Gujarati speakers, right? It's maybe actually less familiar to Gujarati speakers, but more familiar to Marathi speakers, because in Gujarati, I think in the feminine plural, you get syncretism, right? The feminine plural and the feminine singular look the same, right? But here they are different, right? And so it's more like, yeah. So just Kutchi does not have a neuter, unlike Gujarati, which has a neuter. And then also Kutchi makes a distinction between the feminine singular and the feminine plural. Okay. So you have a four-way distinction. There's a participle, and then on top of that you have the auxiliary. So what is very intriguing to me is that it looks like when you, so remember we were asked, we were talking about what is the status of the simple past. Right? The simple past has this special agreement paradigm in Hindi which makes a four-way distinction, unlike the participial or the adjectival inflection which only makes a three-way distinction. So instead of just making the R, A, E distinction, the simple past in Hindi makes a R, A, E, E distinction, right? So the thought that I had for Hindi was that in Hindi what happens is that you end up moving the auxiliary, so which let's say is sitting in asp, all the way to T. So when there is an auxiliary in T, then the participle stays in the aspectual projection. But when there is nothing in T, then this whole thing moves up. I think that the Kutchi past participles in the simple past show us that, because what they show you is that the endings that you get on the simple past, they are not the endings that you get on the participle. Okay, so this has always, I mean, if you are looking at Hindi, right, from the angle after having thought a lot about English, it's always puzzling. Why does Hindi say John eaten the apple? Literally, right? Khaya is eaten. Why is Hindi saying John eaten the apple? And the answer is that Kutchi tells us, and also the inflectional patterns of Hindi tell us, is that actually you think it's saying, Hindi is saying John eaten the apple. Actually Hindi is saying John T plus eaten the apple, except you don't see the T. So that is the structures for John eaten the apple and John ate the apple in Hindi are actually syntactically distinct. When you are saying John ne said khaya, the khaya has moved to T. It is actually sitting in T. In Hindi, the reflex of this is very weak, which is suddenly you go from saying ladkiyan, instead of saying ladkiyan ai, you say ladkiyan ai. Alright, so that you get the E, but the reflex of this in Kutchi is much stronger, right? You suddenly go from the paradigm in A, 3A, to the paradigm in 2. It just goes, you get boom, you already had number and gender, but you end up in a place where you also had person, and you end up getting everything in that location, right? So this suggests that like person is located in T, and even when there is no auxiliary, all of those person features basically can now be realized on the Y participle. In Hindi, that's not the case. So in Hindi, if Hindi was like Kutchi, then we would have said, of course, this. In Hindi, you just get a little bit more inflection, but in Kutchi, you end up getting the full set of inflection. So a way of thinking about this is that there is a head up there which is responsible for person inflection, which normally just lowers and sits on the auxiliaries. But when the auxiliaries are not there and this guy moves up there, then it sits on this guy, right? So that's sort of the separation. So that's what's going on with the. So in fact, what that might even suggest is that really, even when you're looking at things like the ver past auxiliary, you might actually want to split this. You might want to split the root of this auxiliary, the ver, and the inflectional part. So what happens in the when you go from the past perfect to the past in Kutchi is that instead of inserting a ver up there, you insert nothing. And this participle moves up to that slot, right? In Hindi, that's not the case. In Hindi, we would have to say that the person and the other stuff is not independent, right? So that's why you don't end up getting, the participles in Hindi cannot bear person inflection. So this is something morphological, okay. I wanted to tell you about one other fact. So this is a fact, I think Shireen and I have had a discussion about this at a number of points, which is, on the one hand, we really want to put together the syntax and the semantics. However, in some cases, the syntax, at least in the affectual domain, right? There are lots of cases where we say we want to give a particular meaning, but that there are usages which do not fit that meaning. So there is one case which I find very beautiful in Kutchi, which I want to show you. Let me see if I can bring it up. So in Kutchi, so first there is this auxiliary in Kutchi which is just T, and then this can take some inflection. So this is a form that appears with, let's see. So I think this is sing, guy, T / to, depending upon the gender. And what does this mean? It means something like we are singing, or no, he or she is singing.
Anybody. Yeah, it's he or she.
Yeah. So if I put a pronoun, then it is. So this is something called the present continuous, and then this guy has to. This also inflects, and then it's followed by this T, which has further inflection. Okay. So this is the background. So this T form exists. Now I've told you about this, now you've seen this Y participle, right? This Y participle seems to have the semantics of the past of an action that is completed, okay? But completely puzzlingly, you can take the endings, you can take the simple past of Kutchi, which is in table 2, and follow it by the indeclinable form term. So literally it's like, imagine you have a form which is John went, okay, which would be go, this Y inflection, okay. This just means John went. But now you plonk this element which is related to this T guy, and suddenly its meaning is he used to go, okay. Used to go. Why?